Earlier, when I copied a smart object using the new layer icon at the bottom of the layer palette, it had an issue where I said it had two instances of the same object. And let me get into that and what that means so that you can have an understanding to what to do about it. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a new, actually, let's do this. We'll make a new document. I'll just make it a 11 by 8.5, and I'll toss it with a white background, tell it okay. Same sort of thing we've been working with all day, yeah? So I'm going to go ahead and grab my snail, and I'm going to just set it in normally. So as I find my snail with mask, here he is. So we got our snail with mask. I'm going to do it the long way. Just going to drag it over here. Now, what if you don't want to drag it? What if you have like 1,000 of these? What are you supposed to do? Well, it's not a problem. Right click on the layer and go to duplicate layer, which is in here somewhere. Duplicate layer. I actually, to be honest, I usually get to it by clicking on the layer, going to layer, and then going to duplicate layer in here, which is like the third one down. I think it's a little easier. And then I can duplicate this as a snail with mask, and I can change the document destination to this new untitled one document we created. Tell it okay. I'll close this up, and it just transferred the snail over, and behold, here is the snail. Now, if I wanted to store this as a smart object, not a problem. Right click and convert to smart object. Boom, I've got the smart object. Double clicking on it, you'll see that it cropped itself down to the minimum amount. And if you don't want to do that, I believe that's right under the preferences, but we'll get into that in another video where we talk about all the preferences that are available for your smart object. Anyway, getting back on track. If I were to just resize the snail, oops, let's constrain those proportions. Resize the snail, voila, got a snail, and then duplicate this to snail instance 2. And I have two snails, do-do-do and do-do-do, two different snails. If I were to, and close this up, if I were to pick one of these snails, like snail instance 1, and edit the source, hi snail, and add in something like, we'll do a levels, since we were talking about levels earlier today. And I'll just do a levels adjustment to the snail, holding down the Alt key so I can see what's getting clipped in the black, holding down the Alt key so I can see what's clipping in white, moving the gray point over to add a little more compression so that it will kind of even that out and give us better lights. Okay, and save. And now the snail with mask.psb has been saved. When I close it, both snails have changed. Now that's great if you actually want to do that, and keep in mind that the snails can be transformed individually. This will not affect the other snail, just as this will not affect the other snail. They're separate in that aspect. They're still sharing the same source. So in other words, these are two different doors into the same room. I can change or let's say two different windows into the same room. I can change the window dressing and the curtains, but if I were to go into the room, it's still the same room. Anything I do inside the room will be viewed as the same thing on this window. I can rotate the window and I can shrink the window, but it's still the same room. So if you want to have a new room altogether, then you have a specific ability, which is a new smart object via copy. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I right click on here, I have a new smart object via copy. By doing a new smart object via copy, I am actually creating a brand new identical room with an identical window on it. So I can move this guy over here, and I'm going to rename this snail instance 1 and choose snail instance via copy. So now if I were to go into snail instance via copy, whoops, sorry, and again, double clicking on the text area in here, not on the text itself, but in this area, the layers label will bring up the layer styles. Double clicking on the text will allow you to edit the text. Double clicking on the thumbnail will allow you to edit the embedded source file. So in this case, if I were to come in and do our levels trick of inverting on a specific channel. Oops, I went into the mask. I'm going to press escape to get out of there. I'm going to double click the little level histogram here to bring up in the property windows all of those adjustments. I'm going to drag this down a little bit so we can see it. I'm going to choose, let's say, red. I'm going to invert red by dragging the output levels to be reversed. Ooh, spooky. We've got our glowing green snail. Ooh. Anyway, so we've done this. We save it. We close it. I can either press the little X. I've been doing Control W, which is the same thing as just closing this. I believe it's Command W on Macintosh. We'll see that we only have one glowing snail. If I transform it, again, it doesn't affect anything. But if I were to go into the snail instance 2, it's the snail with mask PSB. And if I were to adjust instead of the red channel, if I were to adjust the blue channel, oops, went to the wrong place. If I were to adjust the blue channel using the invert technique, save and close, see that we get a different snail altogether, but it affects snail instance 1 and snail instance 2. However, the snail instance via copy was not affected. So heads up on this. Let me save this real quick. And I'm going to call this snail instances. Okay, heads up on this. Notice the size of the file. And going down here, you can see that we're going to be at a 24 megabyte. And if you click on it, you can see the width and height and channels and resolution, all that good stuff. If you click on this arrow, you also have more options, and you'll notice that we have something called Smart Objects. It says missing 0, change 0. That has to do with linking. We'll deal with that later. Normally I have this set to document size, and that will allow me to see how big my document's going to be. This is important for you guys if you hit an upward limit on Canvas, so we can deal with that if that happens. So I'm just kind of paying attention to it. Now notice if I were to go in and make a snail instance 3 by copying a snail instance 1, the size of my document, and we'll make this snail instance 3, and I'll make this a medium-sized snail. Snail instance 3 increased the document by about 36 megabytes here, or sorry, by about 12 megabytes here. If I were to just duplicate snail object, and then the same thing happens again and again. Let me undo that so it goes away. But there's a difference. If I were to go to one of our snails, and snails instance 1, for example, create a new one via copy, which is new smart object via copy, which is, I don't believe that's falling too far off the screen. You guys should still be able to see that. Rename this snail via copy 2. And save. Notice that this one did not go up by 12 megabytes. It went up by a different amount altogether because, and it looks like 8. So it's going to be a little bit different every time because it is, and I keep doing that, it is actually creating a new document altogether and stashing it inside of this document. Now, if it's smaller than the other one, than the duplicate, then congratulations, you lucked out. Quite often there will be a very large smart object hiding behind the instance of it. In other words, the PSB or whatever else embedded file that you have will be huge, and this is pretty common. Let's reverse one more. And so when you're dragging and dropping like nobody's business and just creating new instances of things, there we go. Look at all these snails. New instances of things through the copy here. Frequently those instances, those windows into that room, will be smaller in size than doing a new one via copy, simply because of the size of the object that's going on. Now that can change sometimes depending on how many transformations you're doing on those through filters. And keep this in mind, the windows into the room, the instance of the snails in this case, the snail being the room and this layer being the window, you can dress those however you want. So if I were to go in and apply a filter on this, let's actually do these two. On snail instance 3, if I were to add a filter, and let's do a distort, and we'll do a ripple. It should be pretty apparent. Yeah, if I could Zoom in. All right, so there's a ripple. Let's make this a large ripple size with a heavy amount of rippling. So snail instance 3 and 2 are going into the same place. And I could prove that real quick by inverting them. Saving. Closing. Notice that these are all the same instances. All their colors changed. But the smart filter is window dressing. It's only happening on the one instance. Same with the mask and same on anything else that's going in. Even though they're pointing to the same embedded object, that's just whatever's going on in the room. The window itself is adjusted. I hope that that analogy makes sense. If you found any of that confusing, please contact me. I'll be happy to go into greater detail about what's going on in this, do some more demonstrations. As is, I think these snails are looking fabulous, so I'm going to leave these guys as is. Look at these amazing snails. Hopefully no one is a snailophobe. Otherwise, this will have been a very upsetting demonstration or series of demonstrations. Okay, so next up, we'll look over the preferences of the smart objects and how they behave when you drop them in. Whether or not you want smart objects by default is controlled under the general settings, and we'll take a look at that. See you next video.